Let's see. Okay, I think we're good. Let me just double check and make sure the stream looks and sounds good. I think we're here. Yeah, I think we're good. I think that's good. I think all is well. So let me just share this on YouTube and then we will get going. We'll share it on Twitter, per se. My bad. All right, copy link, minimize, get over here, share it on Twitter. And away we go. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, good evening, whoever you are, wherever you are. This is yet another episode of UnShrink Me. Happy Saturday, everybody. So if you are brand new to the UnShrink Me universe, this is a Saturday podcast, a weekly podcast on everything mental health. And so this weekly podcast is dedicated to you, the consumers of mental health services, because I want to make sure I do my little part to help people who are currently seeking out therapy, counseling, coaching, or whatever to get the help they need. And so if you are currently getting help or you are looking for help, this podcast is for you. This podcast sometimes involves other people in the profession coming to chat and hang out, and I have a couple of things scheduled here, which will be fun. But generally, the point of this weekly podcast is to talk about ideas that are popular on Twitter and other places and talk about their impact on families and patients so that everyone can get the help they deserve and get the most out of the services that they are seeking out. So this weekly podcast is dedicated to you, the consumers of mental health services. And so thank you all for watching, listening, chatting, commenting, liking, and sharing. And if you're brand new, please leave a comment. Please like, share, and subscribe. Let me know what's helpful and what's not helpful, because that is the whole point, is I just want to be helpful. That's it. Sometimes the stuff I'm saying is helpful. Sometimes it's not. Let me know what's not helpful so that I can say more helpful stuff. Good afternoon, Corey. Glad you're here. Thanks for showing up to the chat. So again, this is UnShrink Me. This is a weekly podcast. What up, Phil? Glad you're here. And this weekly podcast is dedicated to all of you who are out there in the mental health world, whether you're consumers or providers, here to help everyone. And please like, share, and subscribe. My channel is called The Psychology Checkup. Find me on YouTube. And also, I get a lot of my content and post my content on Twitter, so please feel free to follow me on Twitter. My handle is at AlobhaPatrick, at ALOBHAPATRICK. So without further delay, we have some interesting topics today. One of them is, what exactly is narcissistic abuse? This is a very popular term that's tossed around quite a bit, I would say. And so I'd like to discuss that. And then I'd also like to discuss the concept of mental health, because it seems to me that this definitional problem never goes away. So I have some thoughts on that. Also, I want to talk about therapists that can't talk about things. There are some therapists who, for some reason, can't talk about politics, sex, gender dysphoria, and all these kinds of things, and we got to talk about that. We need to be able to talk about it, so that is on the agenda as well. And then we're also going to stop over in CBT and AI therapy land, because as technology advances, more cool stuff is happening and potentially scary stuff is happening. So we have some future-focused conversations as well for today. And so this is the basic agenda. We will see what we get to, and if all goes well, perhaps I'll even try to be funny at the end of this podcast with a joke. So that's the agenda. Let's see what happens. And for those of you who don't know, this podcast is not NOT, not sponsored by Celsius. However, I do love this stuff. So let's see what happens. Let's see how it all shakes out. So I want to start out with the topic of so-called narcissistic abuse. And I'm going to read something and I'm going to retweet something while we're talking. So I'm going to repost this. Again, my handle on Twitter is at AlobhaPatrick. And so feel free to follow me there. And we can chat and talk and joke around and have fun or argue or whatever you like. Okay. So a few days ago, this person named Dr. Craig Malkin, and his handle on Twitter is at DrCraigMalkin. 3 days ago, he said, quote unquote, narcissistic abuse is the wrong label. The abuse is real, but gaslighting, coercive control, devaluation, and reality distortions aren't unique to narcissism. Call it covert abuse. Behavior, not diagnosis. Real harm, better science, clearer language. And there's an infographic made by AI to talk about it. So let's talk about this phrase. So a lot of people believe they're in relationships with someone who is narcissistically organized or has NPD. Fair enough. Some people do have the disorder. Some people are narcissistically organized. A chunk of the population, probably 5% or so. And so, is it possible? Sure. Are you being gaslit by someone because they're narcissistic? Sometimes, but as he said, as Dr. Malkin said, yes, it is true that people are gaslit regardless of whether or not the person is narcissistic. It is also true that people can be projected onto, and that feels crazy making for many people, but that has nothing to do with narcissism per se. So, the idea that it's not narcissistic abuse, I agree with. The idea that it's covert abuse, as he said, I disagree with, because as I commented, if it's readily identifiable, how is it covert, right? So, yes, you can be in relationships, and the people that you're in romantic relationships with, or even professional relationships, because therapists, by the way, also do this. Therapists sometimes engage in coercive control and reality distortion. Phil says, sure, exactly. So if the thing that we call narcissistic abuse involves kind of a selfish gaslighting or a selfish coercive control, I think Nick Tabor would probably appreciate me saying this. It is the case that therapists do this all the time, because therapists have hidden to themselves needs that they play out with patients. And so part of ethical therapy is always being clear about to what degree am I getting my hidden to myself needs met with this person, which you can sometimes only see after the fact. So it's very important to be clear that it is not narcissistic abuse, because we all are selfish in some way, shape, or form. And generally speaking, it's very unclear to me that it's always narcissistic, because selfishness is not inherently narcissism. And then the other thing about it being covert abuse is that if it can be readily spotted, it's not abuse. It's not covert, it is abuse. So there's no such thing as covert abuse. Abuse is just abuse. Whether it's more subtle or more obvious, it's still observable, because if it wasn't observable, then it wouldn't be abuse. So anyways, that is the kind of easy starter, appetizer for today's UnShrink Me. So hopefully that makes sense to everyone. Oh, Phil says your Shure microphone. Yes, my mic stand is a Shure. Okay. So next up on the list of things is an old topic, but an important topic, which kind of segues nicely from the thing I was just saying about so-called clinicians engaging in so-called covert abuse or trying to control or gaslight their patients, which does happen sometimes. So let's talk about it. So this next post is a little on the spicier side. And I think it's worth talking about, because I think it's worth reiterating from time to time. So I'm going to repost it real quick. Okay. So a day ago, someone I follow on Twitter called Blunt Therapist, or The Blunt Therapist, and that's the person's handle, said, if a patient needs to discuss decision-making around medical decisions, their body, and the therapist doesn't have space to allow this person to explore this without bias or agenda, like abortion or transition or gender or whatever, a church counselor may be a better fit than being a therapist. So here's what I said, very, very straightforwardly. So again, I think Blunt Therapist is saying something like, if your patient is sitting across from you discussing medical issues or issues with their body, whether it's, gender dysphoria and treating that, or abortion or whatever it is, and you can't have that conversation without bias, then you're the problem, is what he's saying, I think. And I think I agree. And I said, and I quote, if the therapist cannot handle these topics, then something is moderately to severely wrong with the therapist. Seek supervision, consultation, and or personal therapy. No burp just yet, Phil. So here's the deal, folks. When people are paying for our services as professionals, they are paying literally for our ability to be the adult in the room. One way of looking at psychotherapy, now this is a metaphor, not a literal reality, but I think the metaphor is very important. Ethical clinicians are trying to be the adult in the room because usually patients are coming with all sorts of issues, challenges, injuries, traumas, shame, guilt, whatever it is, and they're not functioning at their best. And so we need to be able to function in a way that is good enough or better enough, if you want to think of that like a good adult would, like a good enough parent would, if you're going to be all psychodynamic about it. And so if you cannot be an adult and handle your feelings and your bias about issues like gender dysphoria, abortion, and sexuality and all these things, then you're in the wrong profession. You should go be a priest or a pastor or whatever it is. I do agree. Now, I want to add a layer to this, which is there's probably something wrong with you. And I think this is important. And I want to say this in as clear a manner as I can. If you are a lefty or a righty and you are so upset about topics like gender dysphoria or abortion or whatever it is, even if it's perfectly valid that you're upset, but you can't handle it as a professional, you need help. Because your personal feelings are valid in whatever way they need to be valid. The problem with that is that we signed on the dotted line as licensed professionals to adhere to our ethics codes and do our best to provide a service to people. So we are a profession, which means that it is our job to get our shit together and handle our feelings so that we can be the professionals that our patients deserve. And if you are so screwed up because of your feelings around shame, sex, sexuality, trauma, abortion, trans, this, that, or the other, then that is a you problem. This is an equal problem that I can see in the left-wing world and the right-wing world, and nobody is an angel here. And the problem that we face is that the profession has become politicized, and the culture war nonsense people are not adults. Even though they're pretending they're adults, the adults really aren't in the room, unfortunately. So I am very blessed to work at the university that I work with the colleagues that I work with. I was actually having a beer with one of my colleagues this last week, and I was talking about how lucky I think I am because I work with adults, people who are interested in doing the correct thing regardless of their bias or their feelings or their lived experience. As a professional, your lived experience is important because it informs the way you see the world. However, you are not being paid to share your lived experience with people. You are being paid to discuss a series of problems and come to a shared solution that's effective for the patient, not for you, the professional. And so therapy is a professional relationship. And if you can't handle your half of the relationship because you're too screwed up in the head by your shame and your trauma and your guilt and your countertransferences in the room and controlling things, that is unethical. Whether it's conservative or liberal or woke or anti-woke or gay or straight or black or whatever, it doesn't matter. Our job is to handle our stuff and be the adult that these people don't have in their life. Otherwise, you're a terrible paid best friend and you're probably playing out some role for them. So ethical clinicians, and I want patients and family members of patients to hear this part of this podcast because it's very important that your therapist is a regular person. Your therapist has their own baggage. And I've said this over and over again on this podcast. And I mean it in the most normal way, not in the shit-talking professionals way. We are regular people. And there's no law, no rule that says we should be anything other than regular people. And our ethics code dictates that we should be regular people who adhere to a higher standard of professional behavior when we're acting in our professional role with families, with patients, and all these things. Ryan says, being a responsible adult is so much of the job. It's exactly what it is, And because being a responsible adult is hard, and many of us didn't have perfectly responsible adults. I know I didn't. I love my parents, and they did a pretty good job, I think, so far, But genuinely speaking, That doesn't mean they were perfect. They had plenty of things that they screwed up and failed for me. And that happens, and that's normal. And so I need to be aware of that when I walk into the room with people who might be in a similar position or have similar experiences as me. Excuse me. And so, genuinely speaking, the challenge becomes, can we be the adults that are needed? Can we be real people and balance the two? That doesn't mean we have to be perfect. I'm not trying to put some puritanical standard of like, be a neutral Buddhist monk. That's impossible. That's inhuman. So we're allowed to be people. Professionals like therapists and psychiatrists and psychologists, we're all allowed to be people. However, if we let our bias get in the way of having an open and curious relationship with the patient, then we are hurting them and failing them and not living up to our ethics code. And so whether you're a right-winger and you think abortion is murdering babies, or you're a left-winger and think, women are being oppressed, or whatever, I don't care. I don't care the topic. I don't care the background, whatever. If in your professional role you can't handle that, you're the problem. Not the patient. You're the problem because you're not living up to what you agreed to live up to when you got licensed. If you want to drop your license and be a coach and be a guru and just, manipulate people and stuff, you don't have to have standards in that particular role. But if you want to keep your license and do what you agreed to do, your job is to be as neutral as humanly possible when it comes to these difficult topics so that the patient can get what they need from you. And so that is very important. And that, I think, is what is missing in graduate psychology training. And I see this all the time in different industries. In rehabs, everyone's got to be sober in AA. In mental health programs, everyone's got to use distress tolerance skills or whatever it is. Like, there are so many cults in mental health. And we should not be cult-like. We should be reasonable, ethical providers who are humans, who also do our best to adhere to the highest possible standard of being the adult in the room, being patient, understanding, and curious, as opposed to projecting our fears, anger, shame, insecurities onto the patient and their behavior. We're going to have judgments about people, and those judgments should not drive our behavior. And if you can't handle it, if you're a righty, a conservative who can't handle it, please get out of the profession or get some consultation and supervision. If you're a lefty and you can't handle it, please get some consultation or get out. Please leave, because you're hurting people and you're projecting your BS all over people. So there are solutions. If you are struggling with your feelings, if you're struggling with your bias, your countertransference, your shame, your own trauma, your own guilt, your own experiences with abortion, your own experiences with sexual discrimination, whatever it is, get some help. There's hope. There's consultation. One of my favorite things I get to do as a professional out here in California is be a sounding board for other people in the profession to be reasonable. None of my colleagues are angels. None of my colleagues are perfect. I am not perfect. I am not an angel. What I am is committed to doing the best I possibly can with the information I'm aware of so that I'm not actively harming people, which is different than Dr. Lockwood is a Buddhist monk who never harms people, never says the wrong thing, never lets his bias get in the way. That's not my standard. That's not my standard for my grad students that I supervise in the clinic. My standard is we can be people, we can be professionals. And the professional side of this should outweigh the person side of this. And that's probably a hot take, but it's the take that makes the most sense, which means that we have to be adults and not infants who scream about our feelings and project our feelings onto the patient, their family, their loved ones. So thank you, blunt therapist, for the grist for the mill here, because this is a huge problem. And it's a problem regardless of religion, sexuality, gender, whatever. I see it all over the map, all over the world. And it's because we're human beings. We are regular people. So thank you, Ryan, for chiming in as well. Hope you're all having a good Saturday so far. Okie dokie. So I want to talk about healthy. I want to talk about healthy because healthy seems to be this very scandalous topic. Corey says it's kind of wild that that's a hot take. I know it is kind of wild, right, Corey? It's kind of absolutely wild. I think it's absolutely 100% wild that it's a hot take. And I believe that there's a way, in my opinion, to make this hot take not a hot take anymore by changing grad school, changing professional associations, and changing the culture in all these places. So, let's see. Okay, talked about that. Let me get to the right tweet, if I can find it somewhere. Where is it? I thought I bookmarked it, but man, I guess I didn't. Let's see. It's somewhere here. Where? Okay, here we go. One of my hot takes that I think I love to discuss over and over again. So let me retweet it real quick. It's about the concept of so-called mental health. And this is especially important for family members. If you are a loved one of someone seeking therapy, counseling, coaching, psychiatry, rehab, whatever it is, I really want you to hear this, because there's a chance that our expectations are going to get in the way of getting a good enough outcome. And that's why I wrote this post. So I've been in conversations with many people this past couple of weeks about the concept of mental health. And I listened to that podcast with that one guy, Dr. Zach Johnson. Is that his name? Zach Johnson? Let me see if I can find it. Zach Bush. Yeah. So that Zach Bush podcast I listened to with Joe Rogan was very interesting. I don't usually listen to alternative medical stuff, but it's interesting. And so there's this concept of mental health that I think is very flawed in the United States and in the Western world that I think needs to be dismantled brick by brick over time. And so that's a hot take. However, I want to do it slowly and thoughtfully as opposed to radically. And so let me read what I wrote, and then we can start to discuss and disagree, etc., as needed. So here's what I said about a day ago. I said, and I quote, "There is no such thing as, quote, mental health. There is no such thing as optimal, in quotes, functioning. Almost everything we think about the mind is wrong. In sum, the mind is a dynamic ecosystem. There's no way to optimize for something always changing, and the context is always changing. So all we're left with is more or less adaptive functioning in a given context at a given time in history." So that's a lot of words to say there is no such thing as mental health because everything is contextual. Now, the fact that everything is contextual is not new or unique to me. I'm not sharing some profound insight that I came up with. This is something that philosophers have talked about for quite some time, hundreds of years. This is something that, postmodern therapies like acceptance and commitment therapy talk about all the time as well. This is a big thing in ACT, as, self as context, right? Because we cannot judge our behavior objectively unless we look at all the layers of the behavior. That's true for everything that is good, bad, and otherwise, right? So things we judge as good, things we judge as bad or neutral, all have a context to them. They all operate in a context, in a backdrop. It's like if you watch a really good Broadway play, it's not just the performers on stage singing and acting, it's also the really cool set that they designed. That's the backdrop. But it's also the orchestra, the music that people are playing. And so there's three parts to every good play. It's the performers and their costumes and their skills. It's the set and the backdrop and the lights and stuff. And then it's also the music. It's the orchestra. And so you can't judge a behavior in isolation, right? There's no behavior that can be judged in isolation, which means you can't have mental health, so to speak, outside of a context. You're not healthy objectively. There is no objective definition of mental health. No one has ever come up with one. Even the concept of being cognitively flexible is not exactly mental health, because in some situations, cognitive flexibility is dangerous to your well-being. So it's really important to be clear that to truly talk about the concept of mental health like an adult from the point of view of what we know about how the brain actually works, We have to completely get rid of this mechanistic view of the mind. This idea that the mind is a machine that's supposed to function a certain type of way is absolute garbage. It couldn't be further from the truth. And I know this is very trendy nowadays because people like Zach Bush that I just mentioned and Chris Palmer, who's all about the keto diet for brain health and stuff. I fully recognize that the body is technically mechanistic. I fully acknowledge that we have a mechanistic thing, the body, the brain, but that is not the end of the story, because this mechanistic thing, our body and our brain, is not static. It doesn't sit here in a bubble and function perfectly, whatever that means, by itself. Our body only functions because of the interaction it has with the outside world. Light, oxygen, sensory stimuli, food, water, all these things, other people. So we only exist because of the good graces of the rest of the world. We do not exist because of our brilliant evolutionary survival instincts or something like that. It is a miracle we are all alive. It is a miracle we haven't been wiped out by an asteroid or something like that. And so literally we only function as mammals because we function in relationship to the rest of the environment that we are living in at the moment. So everything we're currently experiencing, the air that we're breathing, the other, colors and how bright it is in this room, everything affects our mind. So our mind is not this isolated thing that can be fixed. But unfortunately, most of mental health training, psychiatry training, clinical psychology training, clinical psychologist training, MFT training, is about fixing broken minds. I call it the broken Rolex fallacy. And so let's be clear that most of psychiatry, clinical psychology, most clinical psychologists like myself, we're all trained in the same model, which is this broken Rolex fallacy. And the problem with this broken Rolex fallacy is that it's missing giant swaths of the human experience, and it's missing mechanisms of change, homeostasis, and health. Corey said, I feel like a lot of this type of thinking came in about the mid-1980s with the DSM-3 and their adoption of the medical model for mental health. Exactly. He goes on to say, it ushered in ongoing methods and models to make mental health a knowable thing that can be standardized. Absolutely, Corey. It sounds like you know your history. So let's talk about this, because mental health is not the fixing of a broken mechanism. If you think that your mind is a mechanism that can be fixed, you are sorely mistaken. And you're probably going to be miserable if you believe that you can fix a broken thought or remove an emotion that's not helpful or whatever it is. I promise you, you're going to be miserable. And I have my entire clinical career's worth of experience, 16 years now, that says there's no way. Yo, Angie, glad you're here. So let's be clear. There's literally no way. If you think that the mind is a machine, you're going to be miserable as a person. You might function, you might make money, you might have family and friends, but you will be miserable because you are attached to a way of being that's literally impossible. So again, I call this the broken Rolex fallacy. So let me walk this out for a second. I use this all the time with family and with patients, and they seem to get it right away. So I generally want people to understand that the mind is not a machine. That is a terrible way of looking at it, because the mind is not merely the brain and how the brain functions. So let's be very clear that we can't do that. And Angie says, I allow my mental health symptoms instead of being afraid of them and running to a shrink. Yeah, you should allow all sorts of things, but we'll talk about what it means to allow things in a little bit. So here's the broken Rolex fallacy. This is the short version of it. I'll do a longer video on this someday, but this is the short version of it for the sake of today at least, so we don't take up the whole time. So the broken Rolex fallacy goes something like this. The average person who is diagnosed with major depressive disorder or substance use disorder or whatever it is, they think there's something wrong with them. They think their mind is broken, their brain is broken or whatever. And so they're hoping to go to a psychiatrist or clinical psychologist or therapist or counselor or rehab and get fixed. And just like you send your card to the auto shop to get fixed. We're going to go get fixed by a therapist or a counselor or rehab, and then go back to life like you were before, and you'll be fixed. I'm going to fix my depression. I'm going to fix my addiction. I'm going to fix my PTSD. And all these ways of thinking, they're understandable, but they're wrong because they don't work, as evidenced by all the relapse rates and people not getting better and meds not helping and all these things. So let's be very clear that the broken Rolex fallacy posits a couple of very simple things. Number one, the mind is not a machine. Number two, you cannot fix something that's not fixable. Number three, when you have a mechanistic view of the mind, you're going to monkey with things that have second and third order consequences that will get worse with time if you don't understand the consequences of changing these things here and now that have second and third order consequences. So let's walk this out real quick, real simple. So I like watches and cars. I like things more than I like people, interestingly enough. And so when I first got on Instagram years ago, I used to obsess about watches in particular because they're fancy and shiny and how they work is amazing. And so I used to watch these videos of Rolexes that were badly damaged being fixed. And so you can do this right now. If you're on Instagram, you can go there and watch people rehab a Rolex, basically, right? So you can take a 40-year-old watch, a watch that was made in the 80s or 90s, and it'll become brand new in the span of like a 2-minute video. So it ships off to, so you break your Rolex, you break the glass on your Rolex, you ship it off to Switzerland. They take it apart all the way down to the very bottom of the thing. They take the watch band off, they pop the glass off, they pop the back off, and they take every little gear out and they replace every little thing, and it's functioning just like brand new. So you can take a watch that's 50 or 60 years old and it can function like it was made yesterday, which is amazing. And so that is what most people wish could happen, because when you have a loved one with mental illness, you often think they're this precious, valuable thing that you wish you could fix. So that's why I use the Rolex idea. So it's like, I'm going to take my son, because I used to run drug rehabs for a living. I'm going to take my son or daughter who's got an addiction. I'm going to ship them off to rehab, just like you ship the Rolex off. You're going to go fix them. You're going to get them sober. You're going to teach them coping skills. They're going to come back and they're never going to use drugs ever again, and everything's going to be okay. And that is the broken Rolex fallacy in a nutshell. And that happens all the time. And it happens to this day. And I try really hard not to let people think that way. I try to explain what I think is true without trying to convince them per se. And so here's how the mind actually works. The mind is not a thing that can be fixed. You can't just change a problematic core negative belief, to use CBT language, and fix it and replace it with a core positive belief. That doesn't happen. You know, and maybe I'm just a shitty therapist and I've never been able to do this, but like that doesn't happen. So what you do is you help people have more realistic views of themselves. You don't help people have idealistic views of themselves when they have negative views of themselves. You help them have more realistic views of themselves. And so if someone is struggling with an addiction, addiction is not just a disease of the brain. Addiction is a disease of the family. It's a disease of society. It's a disease of your food and your diet and your sleep and all these things. So you can't just get somebody sober, send them off to AA, and everything will be perfect. I wish that were true. Because addiction is a multi-layered problem. It has individual components, brain neurology components that are real. It has psychosocial components, your friends, inflammation, your diet, your sleep, your family boundaries, because your family can reinforce your bad behavior or not, your maladaptive behavior. And so we have to actually look at the whole person. And a person is not a machine. A person is a dynamic ecosystem. And everything that is in our ecosystem, just like there's a desert and a taiga and a tundra as different types of ecosystems, there are different types of people who live in different types of climates, who have different types of inputs. And so I can't perfectly understand you, your culture, your genetics, your personality, your intelligence. I can't optimally understand you because there is no optimal way of functioning. Even though clinical psychology, we try to study concepts like the Big Five of personality, which I'm a fan of, That's a reductionistic view of how people work. Yes, these personality traits are reliable and do replicate across the world and do predict real life outcomes fairly strongly. That doesn't mean that's the whole story. Your personality or temperament is a piece of the story. The way you were raised by your family is a piece of your story. Your sexuality and gender is a piece of your story. The environment you live in is a piece of your story. Your friend choices, your career choices, your sleep habits, your food habits, all these things are pieces of the puzzle. And all these things make up the ecosystem that is your mind. And all these things are changing because your friends will change, your career will change, where you live will change, your relationship with your spouse will change, your relationship with your pets will change. All these things are dynamic and changing, sometimes on a daily basis, sometimes on a weekly basis. So the idea, the arrogant idea, that mental health professionals like myself or anyone else could create this super cool predictive regression equation that can incorporate the thousands of variables, literally thousands of variables, to predict so-called optimal functioning is horseshit. It's impossible to know because these are all ever-changing dynamic forces. These are not static forces. My relationship with my parents is not static. My relationship with my grad students and my colleagues as professors, not static. My romantic relationships, not static. My friendships, not static. These are all changing things. And if you really respect people, then you understand these dynamic experiences, as reliable as our genetics are to some degree, as consistent as we are depending upon our personality style and things like that, some personality differences are very reliable. You cannot take someone who is narcissistically organized and make them 50th percentile of trait narcissism. It will never happen, no matter what Zach Bush or the psychedelic types think. We all are built differently, and that is what is reliable about us. What is unreliable about our mind are all the dynamic environmental interchanges that we can't control. We can't control the people that we love. We can't control our family. We can't control society. We can't control the amount of sunlight that exists outside. We can choose how much sunlight we expose ourselves to, but even that, to some degree, is out of our control. So what I'm trying to say to everyone is the broken Rolex fallacy is what mental health treatment has been built on for 100 plus years. This mechanistic view of the mind is what has related to the suffering and the chronic misery of so many people who are in treatment, in therapy, in rehab, in counseling. Because when we look at the mind as something that's supposed to function a certain type of way, you're now putting an objective standard to something that possibly can't be achieved. Like, let's just take the concept of the keto theory of mental illness. So the idea that your mitochondria and your neurons in your brain are not functioning effectively. Is that likely true for a lot of people with mental illness? Sure. I would also argue that there's a lot of people who have ordinary misery, who aren't diagnosed with something, whose mitochondria aren't functioning super well because their diet sucks, their sleep sucks, they don't drink enough water, they don't breathe through their nose enough. And they're not diagnosed with major depressive disorder, schizophrenia, or bipolar. They're just kind of like ordinarily miserable. And would keto change their life? Maybe, but I doubt it. And so again, in summary, the broken Rolex fallacy is the false belief that you are a precious, valuable thing that is mechanistic, that can be fixed by a therapist, a clinical psychologist, a psychiatrist, a rehab, whatever. And that's not true. You are not a thing. I am not a thing. We are not things. We are dynamic ecosystems. We are not static. We are not stagnant. We are dynamic. We're always changing. All day and all night, our brain, our body, it's all changing. Now, is it changing massively? Sometimes. Is it changing on a minor scale? Sometimes. It's all over the map. It's not linear. A lot of people have joined the chat, so I want to go back to the chat. But I hope everyone understands that this idea of mental health is bogus. And I will say this as a grad psych professor, as a clinical psychologist, and as just a regular person. I have never in my life spotted a mentally healthy person. I've spotted people who demonstrate some traits that I like, that make me feel good. I've interacted with people that have made my life better, but that does not mean that they were mentally healthy. Just like there's no such thing as physical health. There is no ideal way of physically functioning. Now, there are crystal clear signs of impairment medically and psychiatrically. If you are so psychotic that you can't do things like remember to eat or clean yourself, you will die. And so there is such a thing as severe impairment. That's real. But the idea that there's a perfect amount of reality testing is not true, because there is no perfect amount, because the mind is changing and dynamic. Our circumstances are changing. Part of what we do when we watch movies and Broadway plays and stuff like that is we suspend disbelief. If you've ever enjoyed a magic act, which I've never enjoyed because I'm very rigid and concrete as a person, you suspend disbelief to be wowed and mystified. And so there is no perfect amount of reality testing or whatever it is. So mental health doesn't exist. The mind is a dynamic ecosystem, which means all we can do is try to be as adaptive as possible in a given context. That's all we can do. Because we're all built differently and socialized differently, our capacity to show up in the ecosystem as a unique contributor to that ecosystem is the blessing of life. Like, one of the very cool things that's happening right now as we're talking is there's all sorts of really interesting different people in my chat right now. And I am nothing like them and they are nothing like me. And so because of that, we have a really cool back and forth where I get to change and grow because of my interactions with them. And so speaking of which, let's take a look at the chat. Angie says, and I quote, "The mental health industry is not clear about what their purpose is. Patients think they are broken because of the diagnosis. Patients think their providers will fix this." And that's exactly what I am railing against in this very moment. And that's why I came up with the broken Rolex fallacy. Corey said, this really got reinforced in 2001 with Zoloft's marketing campaign that played on the disproven chemical imbalance theory. Yeah, those Zoloft commercials were like gut punches kind of thing. Corey further said, "The sad reality is that a lot of this seems to come as an end result of needing to deliver measurable outcomes to insurance companies who don't like the ambiguity of the mind. The mind is not only ambiguous, but it's also dynamic and layered and not located inside the individual. The mind is a co-creation of what is outside with what is inside. The mind is kind of like, I guess metaphorically, a tornado where hot air pressure and low pressure systems mix together to create, a force like a tornado." Jonathan Cogburn says, Jonathan, so glad you're here. "My mitochondria can't breathe because I'm rucking and listening." I'm so happy that you're rucking, and I hope that you get some sprints in too when you get a chance, because sprints, they're good for the brain, I hear. They're good for the body. I did some sprints earlier today while I was on my run. A lot of fun. So that was a very long-winded segment on the fact that there's no such thing as mental health. Every time a provider talks about it, I start to worry what they mean, because I don't know what it means for a given individual to be healthy. What I can objectively assess is how problematic their behavior is in a given environment, in a given relationship, but I can't say objectively, existentially, this person's behavior is great across all time periods. Because life changes. Social standards change. Beliefs and needs change. They don't stay the same. Your needs when you're 5 years old are not the same needs that you have when you're 35 years old. Yeah, sure, we all need to be like safe or whatever it is, but that is just the tip of the iceberg, so to speak. And so depending upon who you are, if you're an artist type, you need chaos and creativity and flexibility. Whereas if you're a practical, let's say, farmer type, you don't need chaos to be satisfied in life. You need consistency, you know. Low trait openness. That person lives a very different life than someone who's at the 90th percentile of trait openness. And trying to treat them the same is absurd. They're not the same person. So please, I hope if you're out there and you're listening, if you're a family member of someone with a serious mental health problem, if you're a family member, if you're married to someone who is in therapy or counseling, please understand that their process is dynamic. It's not static. There's no linear, like, I'm going to fix this problem, check. I'm going to fix this next problem, check. That's not how mental health works. That's not how treatment works. So to go back to what Angie said, and I quote, the mental health industry is not clear about what their purpose is. I, as a provider, as a clinical supervisor, as a professor in graduate psychology, I am extremely clear about what my purpose is. My purpose is very straightforward as a provider. My purpose is be as honest as I can, as clear as I can, as open as I can, and curious as I can in a given moment to be as helpful as I can. And that might mean talking about coping skills. That might mean insight-related conversations. That might mean just being a regular person for a few minutes, joking around. It could mean all sorts of things, but my job is not to fix a person. My job is to have a professional relationship, to come up with a reasonable, achievable goal for the patient that we can mutually agree on, that is led by them, that we can probably achieve together. Because certain things I can do with people. For instance, I can help you sleep better. That's not rocket science. I can help pretty much anyone sleep better, minus people with serious medical problems. I can help most people sleep better. But that doesn't mean that that will be the focus of our relationship for the vast majority of people. Sometimes I do family therapy. And in those family sessions, sometimes it's looking at dynamics and sometimes it's talking about assertiveness strategies. It's not static because the situation is not static. The situation is dynamic and changing because people are dynamic and changing. So I hope that all makes sense. And I hope that you don't fall prey to the broken Rolex fallacy, because I think it is ruining, quote unquote, mental health in the United States. And there is no such thing as mental health. No such thing whatsoever. Mental health is not real. Mental health is marketing. It's a marketing slogan. And I encourage you not to use the marketing slogan ever. If you're a provider, please don't use it. If you're a family member or a patient of a family member or whatever, just it's not necessary. It's so not helpful. Let's talk about patient-specific goals and needs. And let's try to understand people for the complexity that they demonstrate, not for the simplicity that they are. Okay, so the last topic that I want to discuss today is kind of a twofer. So I'm going to retweet this real quick. Okay. All right. So there is an AI company or something like that. Wait, let me get to the comment here. Corey says, I'm actually in the process of writing a series on Substack talking about the process of how mental health became a product instead of a wellness concept. So this all resonates with me. Good. I'm glad it resonates with you. Awesome. And I hope that you write that series on Substack and send it to me so I can repost it and share it, because I'd love to support you. Because supporting people is where it's at. So, the last topic for today's podcast is AI in therapy. So, there are so many things that are happening in the world of AI. Some of them tragedies, some of them interesting, potentially useful. So I have no clue. This next topic I think is more on the tragedy side of things, but we'll see. So a few days ago, someone shared a screenshot of this thing called Therapy Q. I don't know this company. They're welcome to sue me for slander or whatever. I don't give a shit. Here's the problem. Therapy Q is described on their website as a real-time co-pilot for therapists. So go check it out. Check out Therapy Q. And here's what they say. Therapy Q listens during your sessions, so AI will be listening during your session and, quote, gives you real-time prompts, so it tells you what to say, insights, and guidance, so you can focus on your client. So first and foremost, if AI is talking to you on a screen somewhere, you're not paying attention to your client because you're paying attention to the screen. We can't split our attention like that. None of us are superhuman. That's ridiculous. So Therapy Q, you're lying. You're not paying more attention to your patient. You're paying less attention. So you should change your language because you're lying. It's not true. It's bad marketing. Maybe hire a psychologist and we'll help you write it correctly. So that's number one. Number two, nobody should have AI listening to their sessions. Nobody. From the point of view of ethics, privacy, from just a pure point of view of privacy, there is no way in the world AI should have any ears inside your session. That's bananas. So let's be very clear. This real-time co-pilot for therapists is a horrible idea. It is probably one of the worst ideas. And I think it's really, really important that everyone understands this is a terrible idea. Now, do I understand the spirit of this idea? Yes, the spirit of this is great because many therapists don't want to write notes. I don't like writing notes. I think notes are fucking stupid. I can't believe we have to do that. HIPAA, all this crap. Understood. We have to. Why? In case we're, sued or protect patients, right? Fair enough. So if there's a record, we can know what happened and we can, do the forensic thing if someone gets hurt by a professional. I understand that. I also understand it for billing purposes if you're using managed care. AI listening to your therapy session is all bad, in my opinion. And many companies do this. Many companies do this, and I think it is a terrible idea because the more therapists do this, the less privacy the patient has. And the more you give away privacy, the less protected your relationship is. For many people, many vulnerable people, minorities, people being abused, people in intimate partner violence relationships, the therapist relationship is the most safe and private relationship they have. And the idea that you're going to give up your safety and your privacy to a tech company like Therapy Q or whatever is a terrible idea. And we are all in trouble that this is becoming mainstreamed and normalized because, yes, would I like to be lazy and not have to write my notes? Sure. Do I want AI telling me what to say to my patients? Fuck no. Because AI doesn't know me. AI doesn't know my personality, my culture, my genetics, how tired I am that day, how caffeinated I am that day. AI doesn't know anything about my personality, what my skills are, what my knowledge base is. AI knows nothing about me, so prompting me is fucking absurd, I will say. And so let's be 100% clear. Let's be black and white and rigid thinking about this. Speaking of cognitive flexibility, do I get the idea of like, yes, I don't want to have to write my notes. AI, please summarize the session for me. Sure. Fine. I would love to be lazier and not have to do that piece of the job. But what that comes with is it comes with the sacrifice of privacy for the patient, which is terrible. Absolutely terrible. And then there's all these people that are using ChatGPT and all this stuff for therapy, which is even more terrible. Do not put your private thoughts and your needs and vulnerabilities and insecurities and hopes and dreams into AI. That's a terrible idea. Treating AI like your friend is the worst thing you could possibly do, unless this is Terminator 2 Judgment Day and Arnold's going to save your life. Otherwise, terrible idea. Don't do that. Please don't do that. So I'm probably going to get sued. I'm probably going to get fired for this, but worth it because this is the truth. I'm not a crazy person for saying this. I'm not some weird conspiracy theorist. We are losing privacy. We are giving privacy away. And the more we give privacy away, the less therapy becomes therapy and the more it becomes managed care. It's just AI doing your job for you. It's removing the humanness and the privacy and the sacredness out of this experience. And that is bad for everybody. For literally everybody. Now, Therapy Q, if you want some help I'm happy to help you fix this. You're not going to like my recommendations, but I will help you do something more ethical at this point. But that's not ethical. Not at all. And that's dangerous. And so let's look at a potentially better version of what Therapy Q is talking about, which is what happened a few days ago. So a few days ago, there was a digital CBT program. So I'm going to post this real quick. I know we're kind of near the end of our time. This is important. So there was a study that came out a couple of days ago that showed that digital CBT did better than basically usual care for anxiety and depression in college kids. So there are a number of computerized CBT modules that have been created and used for about a decade now. And all of them show, generally speaking, that they help people with mild to moderate versions of anxiety and depression conditions, GAD, mild MDD, things like that. And so I am all about people choosing to use a closed server, not hooked up to the internet, CBT program. If you want to use like a coping skill app, I'm all about that. If you want to use an app that is de-identified where they don't know who you are and what your name is, that would be awesome. That being said, it still comes with privacy risks. So am I all about computerized CBT for people who want to use it, or app-based therapy and things like that? Yes, I'm all about it, because I think technology is going to be so helpful for people who don't have access to overpriced therapists and things like that. I'm all about it. So I am not anti-AI and I'm not anti-computerized therapy, because I think that will help a large chunk of people who need help, who don't necessarily need to go seek out an actual person. But for the people who need an actual relationship because of how traumatized they are, how scared they are, how bad their IPV relationship is, etc., computerized CBT could be violating their privacy, could be, potentially. And so I am both optimistic and not, because I think some of these technological changes are going to be awesome and they're going to help people who don't normally have access to help. I'm all about increasing access to some kind of help, but I am not about violating people's privacy specifically. And that is my concern, dear Therapy Q. If you're going to come at me, it's the privacy piece. It is protecting the privacy of the relationship, and you cannot guarantee that if your server is on the internet. You can never guarantee that. And so that is the problem. That is absolutely the problem. And so we are in a very rough time, because people are going to lose privacy more and more as time goes by, as more and more AI-based this, that, and the other is showing up in therapy spaces and counseling spaces and rehabs and things like that. So just some rants about AI. I hope this all makes sense. If I'm going to get fired and sued, I'll let you know, and maybe it'll be the end of me. I'll finally get canceled. Thank God. So some chats and comments before we end today's podcast. Angie said, I fired a therapist because she was using AI. Yep, that's wild. Angie said, AI is making us dumber. Yeah, maybe. I don't know about that. Sometimes. Corey said, Copilot seems like this ongoing cultural obsession with optimizing everything to the point of absurdity. Yeah, we don't need to optimize. Certain things shouldn't be optimal. The messiness of normal relationships is part of what makes them beautiful. Yes, Corey says, there are some aspects of life that cannot and should not be optimized. I agree. I think, he said, some aspects of AI like that can be helpful, but I worry about big tech. Me too, buddy. Me too. We live in very strange times. So, I hope today's chat was useful, interesting to you all. Thank you for being here in the comments and chatting it up with me. It's a lot of fun. It's much more fun than me just screaming into a microphone or something. So thank you. Thank you for being here. Let's keep this train rolling every Saturday. And I will see you all next week at the same time, roughly speaking, on next Saturday for another episode of UnShrink Me. And as always, please Please share this podcast with anyone who you think might be interested or who might have something to contribute to the chat. Please follow me on Twitter at AlobhaPatrick and come at me or chat with me. Please like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube. It's called The Psychology Checkup. And my weekly podcast is called UnShrink Me because I'm trying to get rid of this arrogant, know-it-all shrink stuff and create a more human, understandable, realistic way of looking at mental health treatment. Without further delay, it's time for a joke. I think we have enough time, so let's run it and see what happens. So I once had this patient. Interesting patient. So I worked with this gay guy years ago. Nice guy, and so I'm in the community, so I know what some of it's like culturally. So this was a very attractive person, objectively speaking, a person in very good shape and very good looking and blah, 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 blah. And so this very good-looking younger gay man was in therapy with me because he had a lot of relationship insecurities. He came to therapy saying, I have a lot of fears of commitment. I said, okay, no problem. Let's talk about it. So during the first session, he told me all about his fears of commitment. And, childhood stuff, mom stuff, dad stuff, past relationships, things like that. So we created some goals together to try dating different types of people compared to who he was previously trying to date, right? So let's date different people because sometimes that helps. And so he met this cool guy who was really nice and very different than one of his most recent exes. And so it was going swimmingly. And so he came back to therapy one week and said, Doc, I met this guy. He's super cool, blah, blah, blah. We went out. It was great. All these things. Awesome. So 2 weeks later, he comes back to session and he says, I don't know if it's going to work. And I said, what do you mean? It was going just so well just last week. What happened? And he said, well, this person is really into sweets. I said, why is sweets a big deal? I thought a lot of people like sugary stuff, cookies, whatever. He said, well, but I'm afraid that I might get fat if I date someone who is really into sweets. I'm like, are we talking body dysmorphia? Are we talking fat phobia? What are we talking here? I said to him. And he said, well, I wouldn't call myself fat phobic because he thinks of himself as a progressive and sensitive. But he's like, he very much, I think, prefers his abs over his inclusiveness, if that makes sense. And so he's a little vain. Fair enough. I said, okay, do you think this is a deal breaker? He said, I don't know. I said, okay, well, based on what we've talked about with regard to your fear of commitment, it might be good to continue running the experiment and seeing how much of a deal breaker this actually is. And so he goes out, he goes on one more date with the guy, and at the end of the date, they go to some cookie place like Crumble or something. And he just can't do it because it's awkward. He doesn't want to eat a cookie with the guy, blah, 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 blah. I said, how'd the date go when I saw him next? And he said, well, it was pretty good, but then at the end of the date, he took me to Crumble, and I just sat there, and I just kind of twiddled my thumbs and made up some excuses about my stomach hurting. I'm like, so you lied to the guy? He's like, yeah, I didn't want to hurt his feelings. He's a super nice guy, and I think we're just going to end it. And he looks at me and goes, Dr. Lockwood, do you think I should end this relationship? I said, I don't know. I mean, is this really a deal breaker? That's what I asked you last time, but you haven't really answered me. He's like, yeah, I think I'm going to end the relationship. I said, well, sometimes that's just how the cookie crumbles. All right. I'll see you all next week. Take very good care of yourselves. Have good food. Get good sleep. Make sure you exercise, and I will catch you very soon. Bye-bye.